In every educational setting in the country, classes like this one are presenting new challenges for teachers, students, and administrators. And there is nothing particularly unusual about the class. In fact, it is increasingly typical. But many people are finding it difficult to deal with the changes it represents, for this is an intercultural classroom. Simon, on the left, is a South African, sent here to study by his government.
Did you read this? Yes.
His classmate, Esteban, is from El Salvador. He is staying with relatives while attending school. Mariko has lived in Tokyo all her life. This is her first time away from home, away from her family and her culture. Katya is a Russian student who has traveled widely but has never spent more than a few weeks in any other country until now. Ming comes from the People's Republic of China. His country expects him to do very well here. Like the other international students, he feels the pressure to adapt and adjust every day.
You know, I went to Professor Ford's office to see if he could help me with the reading.
Really? What did he say?
He wasn't there.
That's bad luck.
Well, you know, how can he help us if he's never around in his office?
Well, he's an important man, though.
I just think he's too busy. You know?
Well, keep trying.
Why don't you call him on the phone?
I don't like the telephone, and besides, you're talking to a machine anyway.
It's true.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good. We were just talking about Professor Ford and how busy he is. It's tough.
Yeah, well, what can you do?
Yeah, well, nobody seems to have time here. Everybody's so busy. You know, it makes it really hard for me to get to know people. You know what I mean?
Not really, no. So what'd the reading say about Antarctica?
Are you kidding? You want me to summarize 4 chapters?
Professor Larry Ford has his own pressures. His task extends beyond teaching a class in international relations. He also has to cope with a class divided by culture. Although everyone here knows English, they all seem to be speaking a different language.
First, we want to understand the 1961 Antarctica Treaty. Then, we want to explore possible solutions to the problems that are created by that treaty. Now, for those of us who missed my introduction Friday, could someone review what we discussed? Amy?
Antarctica is currently managed by a small group of economically advanced nations, including the U.S., I think.
High-power industrial nations, like U.S., follow international law. There is oil. The powerful nations try to claim all of Antarctica, including oil. That's how powerful nations think.
Okay. And if there's any exploitation of the Antarctic, the poorer countries believe that the profits should be shared. So a lot of lesser developed countries argue that the entire region should be internationally managed, perhaps by the UN. What do we think Washington's policy should be on this?
Status quo.
Why?
It's efficient, it's controllable. Leave it alone.
Besides, the UN can't run a meeting, let alone a continent.
What else?
It's just not in our self-interest to change. Say we spend billions of dollars to build oil wells offshore. We should be able to keep the revenues. There are wells.
In other words, we should own it.
Right.
Well, yeah, you know, at least now there's some incentive for us to invest there, or for any country that wants to take the risk. But if you make the place international, nobody will do anything. There won't be any incentive because there won't be any profits.
Good.
Why do you say that?
We don't want oil wells in Antarctica.
Okay, let's say in 10 years there's a huge energy crisis. Drilling is now more environmentally safe.
That will never happen.
But what if?
Oil wells will never be safe.
How can you be sure?
History. History.
Okay, let's talk about internationalization of the continent.
Okay, I think we ought to do it. We have to keep Antarctica international. We're all too dependent on each other to think only in terms of national interest. We need more stability in the world, not less.
But what makes you think internationalization is a stabilizing force?
It is the only way.
Esteban?
Well, historically, we have seen that internationalization hasn't really worked in the past, but it makes more sense now in what we are living now today with so much hatred and so much wars between people because of oil. I think it's really important that we keep in mind that we must find a new way to solve our problems instead of doing the same things we have done in the past with wars and killings.
Go on.
Well, I come from a country that is also in war. And I don't want my children to grow up in a country where people will be just killed because of the necessities of other people, of powerful nations. I think it's important that we find ways to solve our problems in a better way, let's say. I think that we have to find a way to solve those road jumps.
Obstacles.
Exactly. And I think it's important that we find a better way to do things instead of just finding a way of killing each other. You know, I don't want my children to grow up in a country, in a nation that is killing each other.
I understand, Esteban, but what specifically about Antarctica?
Exactly. I think that the problem, is that there's still people.
Professor, the problem is the ownership of Antarctica. And the 1961 treaty addresses this type of problem.
I know what the solution isn't. Letting every third world country in the UN argue over the place. There'd be war.
Excuse me, Professor, if I may. Some years ago, some Western engineers came to my village to build a bridge there for us. They showed us where we should build the bridge according to their maps. They had figured out where to build the bridge for us. We did not want to offend them, but we wanted to tell them that it would disrupt centuries of life in our community. This history has shaped our people. So many of us have been brought up with a sense of inferiority because of this. We see this attitude in all the Western industrialized countries. I see this attitude in the 1961 treaty. These attitudes have been a destructive force in this world.
I think I agree with Amy, or I don't know if it was Joanna. I mean, what happens if a dictator tries to take over Antarctica?
If it's international territory, it's up for grabs.
I don't think it should be.
How can you say that?
Unless you make it an international territory, it'll lead to nothing but power struggle.
Come on, you don't really believe that, do you?
Yes, I do.
Ming, what do you think?
I think I agree.
With what? With whom?
I think you're right, Professor Ford. The treaty was signed precisely to prevent such conflicts from occurring. And
Larry, I don't think anyone answered the fundamental question yet. If the U.S. doesn't support international control of Antarctica, won't that lead to a larger conflict?
That's my point.
Okay, it's a good question. Now, what historical precedent do we have to answer such a question?
The 1979 Geneva Treaty of Ballins Island.
Yeah, but in that case, internationalization led to paralysis. Nothing got done there.
Good.
What do you mean, good?
It is good that nothing got done there. I know because I've been there. It's an incredible place. High cliffs, overlooking rocky beaches, and very unspoiled.
Would you feel the same way if you were a native?
Oh, God. Especially if I were native.
Okay, let's say that there's a huge oil field discovered offshore that's going to bring money and jobs to the island.
Mm-hmm. The natives would never share in prosperity.
Never?
Never. If something is unjust, it must be changed. That's all.
Isn't that a little naive? Let's say we internationalize the continent. Some militaristic government comes in, decides to have expansionist policies, and they claim Antarctica.
That is ridiculous.
Is it? The Soviet Union might have planted nuclear weapons there during the Cold War if it hadn't been for that treaty.
What is your evidence to support that? There is none.
I disagree. I think we know enough about the Cold War to support such a conclusion.
And I think you're wrong. And you don't understand anything. And this discussion is meaningless. It doesn't not address the facts.
I think we will agree to disagree. Marika, we haven't heard from you. What do you think about this?
Excuse me?
What's your opinion?
It's a very difficult issue. I think it needs great study.
Excuse me, Professor Ford, but you wanted us to remind you about the papers?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Amy. Listen, why don't you all take a break for a couple of minutes, and I'll go get them.
We're not getting anywhere. Everybody talks, but nobody listens.
Hey, speak for yourself.
I am. It is my opinion that we're not discussing anything.
That's exactly the point.
First, we must listen to the teacher.
Look, we're trying to discuss legitimate issues up here, but some people have trouble sticking to the point.
What do you mean?
Well, I, for one, try to follow along.
You just talk for talking. You don't listen and you have no information.
What's your problem?
All your conversation about dictators. What do you know about dictators?
Listen, if you don't like the way we discuss things, can you tell me why you came here to study? I mean, why didn't you go to college in your own country?
Charlie, shut up.
If you don't like other people's opinions, at least you should be polite. You don't understand.
Give me a break.
It's not as if I don't try. I do. I try very hard. But international students can be so frustrating. I have all these objectives for each class, but I can never get through them. The students just don't talk at all. Or they talk too much. I can't guess what they think, and I can't tell what they know unless they participate.
I try my best, but it is very hard. This is a very different place here. I never can be sure what I'm doing is right or wrong. In China, you cannot interrupt the professor. Even you cannot raise your hand. But here, you must. I trying to talk in the class, but it is very hard to follow the discussion. Sometimes I really want to say something, but when I get a chance, someone else is talking, or the professor has gone on to something else. It is very difficult.
I truly believe that people from other cultures have a lot to offer. I really do. But in class, Esteban and Simon are hard to follow. They never get to the point. I really want to understand, but I have to admit, I get a little impatient.
Sometimes I think the professor and the students get very annoyed with me. Sometimes I don't think they understand me. Perhaps they think I'm not so smart. But I graduated from high school with honors, with many A's. My country believed in me enough to send me here. How can I prove myself to Professor Ford?
I don't know, with some of my international students, I feel as if I'm being too hard. And then with others, it's like they're about to jump down my throat.
I argue because I feel deeply about things. I guess it's a Russian way. And I've studied, and I know facts.
I can argue with my teacher. He's my teacher. The Americans talk like a machine gun. it is very hard to understand what's going on in the class when they talk to each other. If you stop listening for 1 second, you are lost. I think the class should be more formal and respectful.
There are so many things I don't understand. Why does Professor Ford let his student talk so much? He's the one to learn from. In Japan, people only talk to say something very important. You don't just say what is on your mind. People here even talk when they haven't done the reading.
I assume foreign students are here to get an American education. I teach critical thinking, and I expect coherent discussion, clear writing.
Sometimes I think Professor Ford is a very cold person. He doesn't have passion. I know. He thinks I'm crazy. And yet he lets other students to talk nonsense. Why doesn't he tell them that they're wrong? Opinions. What is so important about opinions? We have to deal with the facts. I don't know. Maybe I should not participate in the class anymore. Maybe I just should be quiet.
I don't want to say my opinion. Listening is more important. Professor Ford say, "What do I think?" That is very hard to answer fast. When I look at the paper he gave me back, he said it's good, but what about my opinion? I don't think it's very good to express my opinion.
Professor Ford called me in his office. He wanted to know if I copied something from the book. I said no, I would never do that. I just studied the words from the book. But I don't know if he believed me or not.
I'm sure the foreign students are very interesting people, but I just don't know how to make friends with them. I'm not sure someone like Katya would like to get to know me. She seems so dogmatic about everything. I'd also like to be friends with Mariko, but she seems so shy.
All my friends, they either Russians or other international students. All of them.
The North American students pass me by the hall and they say, "How are you?" But they don't stop to hear my answer. They just go by really fast and they don't want to be my friends. They don't want to get to know me.
These foreign kids, they don't want to fit in. In fact, they do the opposite. They stick together. They don't try to get to know us. And they always seem so disapproving of everything we do and say. Some of them don't even speak English. I mean, it's our country. They're the ones who should change, not us.
If I tell Charlie how I feel, he just ignores me. He doesn't hear what I have to say. And then he's very impolite, and in class, he says things he shouldn't say.
I never know with my international students whether they're motivated by something personal or by an idea.
I'm just not getting through to the teacher, to the class. I talk about the weight of history, the burdens we carry. They talk about solving problems as if it were mathematics. Things cannot be made so simple.
In my country, life is with people. We do things together. But here, everybody's an island. Everybody's so busy. I'm learning a lot here. And there are many choices here. I open the newspaper, and there are many lectures and concerts and places to go. But what good are the choices if everybody's an island?
Okay, so where were we on Antarctica?
the face of our society is changing. We are becoming more diverse, blending the values and habits of many cultures, and finding in this mixture many opportunities for growth as a community and for enriched experiences as individuals. But the intercultural environment is also presenting us with problems. Nowhere is this trend more apparent than in the classroom, where, as we saw in the first tape, the meeting of diverse cultures can, despite best intentions, lead to conflict and misunderstanding.
We're not getting anywhere. Everybody talks, but nobody listens.
Hey, speak for yourself.
One of the principal issues that's developed in this film is a question of the potential of creating community, or indeed the need to create community.
The global changes, I think, have brought about conflict, both in the world at large and in the classroom. And I think that the classroom is a good starting place for beginning to address and resolve some of these conflicts.
We have to function more and more in multicultural groups. So we've got to create the methods by which we do that. And certainly academic institutions provide one of the best experiment grounds, testing grounds for trying it.
In this tape, we will take a closer look at this classroom scene and explore ways to create community through an understanding of the cultural basis of the conflict.
We bring into the classroom certain cultural values and assumptions. Sometimes those are manifested as competition, and at other times cooperation. Some emphasis on interdependence, and at other times on individuality. And these do come into conflict on a regular basis. People bring different styles and different ways of relating with them. And at some point, we need to get beyond these individual differences and to collaborate and negotiate a new way of relating.
Culture is not static. It is dynamic, it changes, and it can be learned. However, the learning is a complex process. It cannot be imposed on someone. It must be understood with all its complexities.
All of us come into the classroom, all of us come into any situation with our culture, with those things which we have grown up with. They're tacit, they're implicit, we may not even be aware of them. But those are the things that shape how we view the world, how we behave, what we say, how we say it, what we think about it.
I think people see things in terms of their experiences, other people they've interacted with, the situations they've been in. So the people from very different experiences will tend to see the same thing in different ways, and it's that basic difference that I think leads to potential conflict.
Well, nobody seems to have time here. Everybody's so busy. You know, it makes it really hard for me to get to know people. You know what I mean?
Not really, no.
Esteban, as a member of a culture that stresses interdependence, as many Latin American cultures do, feels the need to complain to others more as a source of support and a sense of creating solidarity. On the other hand, Charlie perceives Esteban as complaining about him, so he becomes defensive and does not really understand the reason for the complaint. As such, friction between them becomes inevitable.
The communication in this classroom has led to the creation of certain kinds of stereotypical thinking, both on the part of the Americans who see, say, Mariko's behavior as very Japanese, and in the part of the students from other countries who see American behavior as stereotyped too. These misperceptions have led to stereotypes on both sides.
I think looking at things more broadly allows us to get outside of the lens, the color of the lens of our glasses, and that allows us to communicate and to better understand other people. And I think that's the essence of getting around stereotypic or stereotype responses.
What you have is a recognition here that cultures do have particular traits, that in any given culture, certain traits, certain ways of communicating, certain patterns of thinking are very common in that culture, and that it is justifiable and reasonable to look at those shared traits and identify them as cultural characteristics.
There are a variety of communication styles in the classroom, and it's not so important to focus on what people are saying, but more in how they're saying it and how people react to the ways in which people communicate with one another.
I think communication really involves verbal, nonverbal. It involves values. It also involves feelings. Communication happens in a context. Then. To understand someone, you have to understand their communication context. And this context is strongly shaped, I believe, by culture.
The style of the classroom is set immediately by the teacher. His manner, there are no greetings as he enters, suggests that his role is to manage the class time efficiently. While the American students are familiar with this emphasis on goals and objectives, students from other cultures generally perceive the teacher as being cold and uncaring. For them, the personal and even the emotional have an important role in classroom discourse.
I come from a country that is also in war.
Esteban, especially, believes in a personal interpretation of the subject, and his answers tend to mix facts with feelings.
Excuse me, Professor, if I may.
Simon has a similar style. He disagrees with some aspects of the discussion, but feels it is inappropriate to show this directly, so he tells a story to make his point. In both cases, the personalizing of the arguments leads Simon and Esteban to longer answers, which their classmates may perceive as rambling and unfocused. Charlie, Joanna, and Amy all understand that their grades depend, to some extent, on verbal performance, so they compete to show the teacher their individual competence by asserting in short answers their strong opinions.
Yes, I do.
Mariko's cultural orientation teaches that the student is in the classroom to listen, quietly and respectfully, to the teacher.
I think you're right, Professor Ford.
Ming, similarly, does not promote his own opinions because he was taught that the student's role is to echo the wisdom of the professor.
Oil wells will never be safe.
Katya represents yet another communication style. She applies the tone and pitch of Russian to English words, creating a speech pattern that is sometimes misread as rude and aggressive. This misreading of communication styles can lead to troubling conflicts that can seriously undermine the harmony of the learning environment, an environment that must accommodate not just different styles of communication, but also some very different learning styles.
In the American context of education, you look at schooling as a process whereby people come to school to learn and to get information that either they might use it in their life or they might not use it at all. In Simon's case, education is a continuous process. Schooling represents part of it. He is getting his education from the contact with his other members of the family, his friends, his peers, the oral tradition, the social practices, and schooling represents just a small proportion of that learning experience.
In the American classroom, your performance is measured by your assertiveness, by your individual opinions, and by your expression of them. In the Japanese classroom, as Mariko has experienced, your performance is measured by your appropriateness, which means actually more silence and more absorption of what's going on than rather than aggressiveness.
You'll notice the Russian didn't believe that at all. The Russian participant felt that you had your opinion and you had to argue it. You had to struggle to get your opinion accepted because your opinion was based on the facts.
Ming, on the other hand, is very devoted to the idea of repeating what he knows to be right. That is what the teacher has provided, and that's where rightness comes from, and that's where learning comes from. There's a slight distinction to be made there between silence as learning and repetition of what is the authority in the classroom. But still, both respect the idea that your own opinion is something that you have, but you don't parade in the classroom.
Well, in the film, Simon tells a story. His telling a story is a way of telling other people, I would like you to see things from the perspective that I see it. And accordingly, I would like to take you in my own experience so that you view things through my eyes. you empathize with my perspective, and then you reach an agreement with me, because what is very important for him is the consensus. He is not looking for imposing his ideas. He does not think that it's polite to disargue with people openly and vigorously, because that is going to disrupt the harmony of their relationship.
We, as American teachers, expect our students to behave in certain ways and to share the certain values that we've grown up to know. And in fact, that's not the way that it is. And we need to listen to what the students have to say, to listen to what they say is important to them or how they've come to learn, and to reflect back to them on what we have and what we can offer.
One of the things that's needed in this kind of class, and indeed this is true of the academic institution as a whole, is to find ways to create a multicultural environment, a multicultural community.
To create community or better communication, teachers can try to personalize what they're trying to teach, but what they also can do is they can encourage the students, the other people in the situation, to put what's being taught in a personal context. That's most important for communication to happen. Communication ultimately is a personal message between or among persons.
The professor said that the students are coming to the United States to learn, and he would expect them to learn what is being offered in the classroom. However, he neglects and forgets a very important thing, that these people have a history, they come from a cultural background, and they have life experiences and educational experience. That has to be taken into consideration.
It seems to me that American teachers tend, for their own reasons, both pedagogical and for efficiency, to prefer assimilation of their international students in the classroom. And I think what's actually needed is accommodation, not assimilation. And what happens is that you need accommodation on both sides. You need the Americans to understand that culture is real. It's not just the frosting on some cake that can be, removed. And the international students do have to make some necessary adjustments to be here, but it's a two-way process.
Even in the wildest ideal situation, the American classroom is still going to be an American classroom. It's going to be fraught with American culture, and as one of the characters said in the film, the foreign students have to adapt to American culture. American culture is not going to adapt to them. And that's true of anybody going anywhere.
One of the things to learn from a classroom with people from many cultures is that our own societies need examining. That is, we as Americans can learn a lot from using other people as mirrors for ourselves.
One of the things that's really important for students to be able to recognize is that their fellow students, domestic and international, have a lot to offer to one another. And in the educational setting, it's a perfect time to begin to try to communicate across cultures, to create an intercultural sharing, and to be able to take advantage of the wealth and the richness in the diversity that exists in the classroom.
For the international students as well, there's got to be an accommodation on both sides. We're all going to be giving up something, but we're all going to be getting something much more valuable in return.
Along with our cultural values and cultural assumptions, we begin to recognize how we're similar to and how we are different from other people. And this whole episode of being in the intercultural classroom is in some ways a project of self-discovery. It's not just an awareness of other people, but it's a way to begin to know ourselves.